back to PitBox Social. We have taken a few weeks off. We had spring break. Didn't really do anything, but we took a break for a little bit. I know I was in and out of town for some other business. Tyler was busy doing his stuff. April can be interesting. April can be the busiest month of the year for on-track activity, or it can be very slow, especially in the South. We have a lot of weather, so that can definitely affect track availability and people even wanting to get on track. And we'll get into that a little bit today. We're going to do a few little race updates. We have a Long Beach Grand Prix coming up this weekend. We have friends over there doing Carrera Cup. And then also the race has, I believe it's a GTD race plus GTP. I think that's what we just looked up. So that's always interesting, going from road courses to a street course. So we'll go over some changes on that. And then we're going to get into some driver excuses. We've all heard them in the paddock. We've all heard them with our friends. We've all used them. And so we will kind of myth or fact on some of these common driver excuses we encounter. This will be a little more lighthearted episode. Won't be so intense as we typically are. That's more of a joke there. We're usually pretty lighthearted. But yeah, let's get into it. So Long Beach Grand Prix is this weekend. So all of our people are in California on a street circuit. And Tyler, have you ever been on a street circuit?
No, I haven't. I have not been on a street circuit. It's something I'd like to do at some point, but it's they're grueling. You know, you always see there'll be one car that ends up in the fountain this weekend. They look really exciting, but definitely a lot of challenges there that a lot of people, you don't really think about because you're on a street circuit. The walls are right here. It's kind of like, the walls are even closer than they are at, say, the Nürburgring. There's at least a little bit of grass at the ring before you find something strong, something sturdy.
Yeah.
But no, never been on one, not yet anyways.
Yeah, runoff seems to be like, I guess if I was racing at one of these, if you're used to a road course or even an oval track or, one of the big bank tracks for NASCAR, they build in a ton of runoff. Well, a ton, relative term, but they build in runoff, grass or dirt or gravel, or in terms of COTA, you got miles of asphalt. That's an FIA regulation for F1. But, when you hit to these street circuits, yes, people end up in the fountain. It's I think I was actually watching a video last night of, crazy motorsport moments from last year. And I think 3 of like the 20 were people stuck in the fountain at Long Beach. If you're not familiar with Long Beach, there is the fountain turn, and it is literally what it is. You're going around a fountain, and there's curbing kind of right next to these big flower beds, and people end up either getting pushed into them, spun into them, and then ultimately they get high-sided and stuck. So that's always an interesting point of contact and probably frustration for a lot of drivers at this circuit in particular. But yeah, I would think runoff and damage to the vehicles is probably much higher likelihood at these street circuits. What are your thoughts on that, Tyler?
Yeah, so that's a good point, because I was just having this conversation with one of my guys a couple weeks ago, and I know Miami Carrera Cup sold out like that, trying to get in for the race. And the risk of having damage at Long Beach is so high that you do have to take a little bit of a different attitude to it, kind of a championship attitude where it's about points. You want to win every weekend, but you got to keep the car in one piece and have a car for the Miami race coming up in a few weeks. Because I'm sure there'll be some, hopefully not, but I'm sure there'll be some entry spots that open up, because unless you got a spare car ready to go, Long Beach it's tight. There's nowhere to go, and we've seen it a lot on the Europe, not so much lately, but a lot in the European circuits, where you see these horrendous videos of one car one car hitting a wall or getting caught up in something, and then 2-3 cars blocking the road, and then just millions of dollars worth of damage, unfortunately. But it is a factor.
Kind of like historically, or at least what we've seen, street circuit wise, you have Monaco, which is probably the most famous street circuit. And to be honest, this might not be a popular opinion, but I think it's the most boring race in F1, because usually If you're not on pole, there's nowhere to pass. It's tight. If you do wreck, it's probably red flag because they got to clean up everything, or they have to literally extract a car. And especially on these open wheel cars, you don't flat tow them. You don't, put them on a flatbed. You lift them up. It's a crane that they use, and they pretty much just plop them over the side. They pick them up, put them over the barrier, and then they pick them up later. Same thing with, last year in Miami with the F1 race, with, being a street race. And a lot of these smaller series, the lead up races are GT cars typically, the lead up to like, F1 or Indy that do these. So I think Indy is also at Long Beach this weekend, I would imagine. I think I'm not 100% positive on that. I'm not sure. But, yeah. But the point is, especially on a Porsche, like a cup car, you ding the front, you've taken out your radiator. So your race is done. If you hit something in the front, this. And, the street circuits, I think, are going to be great. I'm really excited to see what happens with the Las Vegas race for F1, because, that's a brand new circuit. If you've ever driven in Miami or in Vegas, the streets are not great. So, is surface a big concern when it comes to these, going from, a constantly prepped and maintained road course versus a public road that they've turned into a road course?
For sure. And to speak on the IndyCar, IndyCar is, of course, there this weekend. Okay. But yeah, the surface is a big thing. That's, they go to these new tracks, like Vegas is a great example. They go to a new track and they find that they either, Formula One often has to modify tracks, especially street circuits, to make it work for the cars. Those cars are obviously so aero sensitive that if the ground's not working in a certain place, it can be really, really dangerous. And then you have like kind of these. There are a lot of interesting characteristics that'll show up in the surface, because you've got everything from small commuter cars to dump trucks and 18-wheelers and all kinds of stuff. So like the surface you'll get random odd potholes or weird wear marks. And I think the aggregate of what the surface is made out of obviously plays a big factor where they hold these races.
Gotcha.
But yeah, there's definitely, like what we see in our other tracks, where it's like there are some nuances, but I think the street circuits every year, maybe there's a new nuance for something where it's like the paint doesn't work because, if it gets wet, the paint may be really sketchier than normal. Or, on a street circuit, you're going to have even more kind of oils and stuff ooze up through the surface. True. Not as much of an issue in California, obviously, but it could be a factor.
Makes sense.
Like the roads will just come apart too. Like you see it occasionally on a road course, but like, if you got Indy cars there and the GTP cars making all of the aero they're making, like it could, occasionally you'll see a track surface just deteriorate and get ripped to pieces because, come off in big chunks because of all of the aero the bottom of those cars make.
So do you remember the movie? I think this was in the movie Driven with Sylvester Stallone. He was like an old retired F1 driver trying to bring up a new F1 driver. Do you remember? I believe they went to a street circuit and they talked about that they had to weld down the manhole covers for the sewers. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the scenes, if I'm remembering correctly, like the manhole cover like flew up off the ground because of the ground effect of these cars. They suck so much air. That's just kind of what popped in my head when thinking of like surface changes. Can you imagine a pothole cover? A 45-pound steel plate flying through the air.
Hell no. Like the 8860 is good, but I'm not trying to test that out. I imagine. Yeah. I would be really curious to talk to somebody like on the logistics or the operations side, or even just the track planning side, because I'm sure there's so many nuances that go into like picking, almost the track is going to pick itself because like what roads can you actually use? It's like, well, we had 2, maybe 3 layouts that we could have used. And it's like, that's like, I wonder if that hairpin.
We're going to pick this one. Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if the hairpin at Long Beach was like, if it was intended to be like that, or they just ran out of road.
Or if they just had to have a feature, they had to have like that iconic feature of the track.
They got a water feature. What else do they want?
I know. But I know one of the interesting logistical things that I know Long Beach deals with, because I remember Kurt Swearingen from ACI talking about when they had to load in. They basically, all the pits are in a convention center along the racetrack.
Oh yeah, the paddock inside.
It's an indoor paddock, so kind of a neat thing for spectators, because you can walk through the convention center and see all the teams working. But like, not hot pits, but like the cold, like your garages that you would typically see people like, working out of. It's in a convention center, so I think that's kind of fascinating. But so we'll see how Long Beach goes this weekend, and we'll do an update in the following weeks about that race and then what else is going on. But kind of want to get into, the start of the season's happened, so now we're starting to hear driver excuses. Tyler, as with some of his clients, I'm sure hears a lot more of these than I do, just being in the paddock.
You use paddock. You're good. You're well ventured in this.
I've used a lot of these, and I'm not shy about it. And, talking, when you're in the paddock, talking about cars is also like talking about fishing. It's, oh man, I almost caught this monster bass. I caught a 15. Yeah, almost. I almost caught that 15-pounder. Oh, my theoretical lap time was this, but this happened. So it's what that but this kind of what we're talking about. And kind of my favorite one to use and to hear is maybe the track is green. So is that a legitimate driver excuse? I say yes. And then we'll go in depth.
No argument there. Like if it rains overnight, and then you're just not going to have the same amount of grip as you had the day before. There is definitely, there's half a second, 7/10, and properly rubbering in a track. But yeah.
So let's talk about rubbering in a track. So let's talk about rubbering in, because some people might not understand what that kind of means. Rubbering in. So and I'll talk from a track day perspective, and you can talk from more of a race perspective, because I think it's more heavily weighed on more of a race weekend because of the way, as the weekend progresses. But so from a track day perspective, if you are at a track day, say on, it's usually Saturday, Sunday, but people have been on track the prior weekend and it has not rained. There is a layer of rubber that transfers from your tires to the aggregate that builds grip. Now, if it rains, that in theory washes away.
Bye-bye.
Right? So that's how I see it as a green track. Yes, a track could be green when it's cold. So it's cold in the morning and then warms up in the afternoon. A track is, when it gets warm, it's maybe no longer green. But a virgin or a green track basically has no rubber on it. But during a race weekend, there is a big factor of, a track being green to rubber it in. So how does that work? Like Trans Am, when you raced Trans Am 3 weeks ago, how did that factor into everything?
So I actually wasn't there for the test day, I think the grip level was pretty good. But as far as rubbering in a track goes, you'll start with a decent surface, or it'll rain or whatever. You go from a green track, and then it'll rubber if you've got enough. If it's a decently populated series, it'll rubber in quickly. But like some of the things that take into account of that are the tire compounds. So if you have, let's say like an IMSA, everybody's on Michelin's, right? And then we're on Pirelli's and now gone to Hancooks for this year for Super Trofeo. So like our tire compound, we'll see how it gets along with the Michelin rubber. So sometimes rubbers don't blend. But like if you're on a Michelin, like that's, it's the grip's going to get better and better and better to a point. And then typically like once the races start, then you're actually going to see a small recession there in grip levels. So you'll expect to see like a peak in grip surface, grip on like Friday. And then like by the time you get to the races, or sometimes you'll see it in practice even, is you'll see a peak in practice, and then you'll stick around and everything. You'll go a little bit quicker in qualifying, but it can play a factor where it's sometimes the peak is earlier in the weekend than you'd think. and then you just get all this rubber and all this shit down on the track, and it doesn't always play well together. And speaking of Formula One,
Gotcha.
what's really interesting is I've been with our friends from Shin Track Days. They always have the weekend after F1 at Coda.
That's right.
And Formula One rubber does not get along with anything. So we like at the first day, that Saturday, following the Formula One race, the track is, it's not even I guess it's green in a sense, but it's really not. It's just that the
doesn't mesh.
Yeah, like the Formula One rubber is so good that it just doesn't work with anything else. So you got there and on a slick, or you got there on a street tire, and just the track feels like crap. So
gotcha.
There's a process to it, but it can happen. A track can rubber in really, really fast too.
Gotcha. So after it gets rubbered in and good, the next excuse, the track is now greasy.
Yep. As soon as the sun
I like this one too. I like this one too, because it's usually later in the day. You're more tired. Oh man, the track's just greasy. I think I'm done. So I'm assuming it's the same thing. Basically, as it gets, surface temp gets hotter, rubber gets hotter. So then, it does turn it. It is a greasy. I think it's a legitimate excuse. It does become greasy. You lose grip.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a legitimate thing. I've heard that the ground like sweats before, basically. You'll kind of get the oils that come up with the rain. You'll get something similar with the sun. I've never been able to see that proved or disproved, so I guess we'll have to go with it. But yeah, that's as the surface gets hot, the tire doesn't stick as well, and the track, the car will become a little bit of a handful as the day goes along. Especially if it's if it's overcast, then you'll have the track for a little bit longer.
Correct. Yeah. There is definitely, I know when we're doing stuff like sticker runs, someone says, oh, I'm going to do a sticker run to try to get that, basically a PB time or whatever. There's definitely a point in the day where you're looking at weather forecast, humidity, basically trying to find that perfect 10 minutes, if that. It might even be 5 minutes, but you're fresh tires, fresh brakes, fresh car. Humidity is not too high, too low. Again, millions of drivers' excuses. And most, to be honest, I think most of them are legit. I think there's always a way to prove that like it actually is something. But I think one that came up this weekend, or I guess a few days ago, with me and you and another mutual friend who we give a hard time, but he's a good driver. But there was my brakes were hot or cold. Hey, Tyler, when you took the car out, you had the fresh brakes, and then I didn't. Now, I think there's some legitimacy to this because, brakes at some point in their life of the brake pad, more than hot or cold, do start losing some thermal capacity to stop the car. But I'll let you expand on this because you were the one there.
Yeah. I think this particular example didn't work. is what me and our friend came to was that one didn't really apply. But yeah, so cold brakes don't work well, right? They don't work at all. So when I went out on cold brakes, I diligently, it's my responsibility as the driver to put heat in them. So I did just that, and then he hopped in and went out just right after me. And he said that the brakes were all hot, and it's something more particular to what's going on with that car being a single master cylinder car.
Correct. 100%. Yeah.
So that's a unique situation, but people, that's what you'll typically see with these, right? Is you kind of get a blanket statement, and then someone will try to insert here, and it's like, wait a minute, that one doesn't work here, because it doesn't apply. There's something more where it's there's something going on with the car or whatever. So you kind of pivot from there, but yeah, that particular one, it didn't exactly work, but
I think that's kind of the same. Yeah, I think this is the same as another one I have on the list here. The car's not making power. Depending on your application, if you're turbocharged or if you're naturally aspirated or not many supercharged, but typically the turbo guys, they want that cold, dense air because then they make more power. So you will see, a morning session that's not humid and has a lot of good dense air. making crazy power. You might get 3 or 4 mile an hour in the back stretch, on a big long straight, versus the afternoon, you might be down 3 or 4 horsepower. So, I mean, that one is legitimate, but does it, when you're trying to make a change or meet a goal, is something like that, do you have to take that into effect? Like when you're not so much HPD, but like when you're judging a race car driver, a professional driver, do you take into account any of these excuses? The car's down on power. I'm not talking about alignment and like setup, but like, yeah, the car's just not making power today. Like, do you have to take that into consideration when you're judging, bringing someone on a program or not?
I mean, no, because it depends. So, like, if it's like peers and stuff like that, then I typically try not to judge. Period, because everyone's got their own stuff, right?
There is no judgment here. We do have no judgment at PitBox Social. We accept all and love all, but yes, unless you're slow.
Yeah, and then we can help with that too. But
yes, we can.
Excuses are like assholes, and everybody's got one. So like, yeah, everyone's got their own stuff that they're working on or they're working through. So and sometimes there is some legitimacy to that. Like I think everybody knows, just at Daytona, everybody that was in a 992R had an issue, right? And that was the BOP, which is one of the best excuses there is, because like you're just everybody's screwed, and that's what you look for is you look for trends, right? So if you look 100%. For someone that's always got an excuse, and they have they're like, oh, it would have been a good day, but then like there's that's not ideal. But if occasionally something happens, it's stuff's gonna happen. It's racing, so there's some validity. Obviously, there's validity, but and some people are quick to the keyboard to tell everybody what their excuse is or whatever. And some people just take it on the chin and they don't say anything, And it wasn't.
But it is what it is.
Yeah.
Yep.
It is. That's exactly.
It is what it is. And I think that's what separates a good driver from a great driver is the fact that kind of maybe no matter what the conditions, you're still developing the car, developing yourself. I think that's a big part of it. You can blame. You could blame the crew guy for putting he put too much torque on the left tire. Whatever. You can making up stuff at this point.
That's a new excuse.
Oh man, he put too much torque on the left lug nut. It was too tight. The left side was too tight.
I've never heard
but hey man, on the fly, off the top. I got to come up with new ones at some point.
You're just a natural with your excuses.
I know. I'm just natural. Thank you. My lack of performance. Whatever. I know you are, but so it's another thing. Like you said, one that kind of piqued my interest, and I think this one's legitimate. I think surface changes is one that, especially at Road Atlanta, and even like Sebring, Sebring. Let's talk about Sebring. The surface changes every time we go. I go about once a year. You probably go more, but there's always a new crack. Concrete's a little different, especially these concrete tracks that and Sebring being such a historic place where they don't really want to repave anything. The track does change from year to year, from event to event.
Sure.
Legitimately, Road Atlanta. We do have that concrete patch in 12. So. And I want you to expand on this a little bit more because my butt can't feel this. Yours can. So you feel it more than I do. But it goes from asphalt to concrete to asphalt. Does that change during the day? Do surfaces like that change during the day?
Yeah. So that patch in particular gets better. Like we went out.
Okay.
We were at David Murray Track Days the last 2 days, and we went out yesterday morning. And the guys were working towards their personal best for the PBs, and I want to speak more towards that later. But yeah, like that concrete patch, when we first went out, was slicker than snot, and you went out and like you just lose the whole front of the car, which is normal. Like you lose it for a second, and then it hooks back up as soon as you jump back onto the asphalt again. But yesterday morning, it was going quicker than it normally would because that concrete was so cold. Cold
Mm.
concrete on a cold tire. And think about like a warehouse floor, right? It's going to be slick and it's going to go quick. So yeah, there's definitely legitimacy to that. And as soon as like, the sun was on it for about 30 minutes, it was good to go. But it needed some help from ambient. I don't know how deep that concrete is. I'm guessing it's reasonably deep considering how big that patch is.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, and then what's interesting is they used to have like you're talking about at Sebring how like the surface changes, and we've seen this at Road Atlanta where like in 21, I think they put in that patch, and then behind like after the patch there was like black sealant coating around it where they tried to like minimize
Yeah.
the amount of surface area that the patch was. Like they tried to like seal over it a little bit to like to
Mm.
lessen the impact, and then now that they've actually gotten rid of it, which I'd be curious to hear why.
Well,
Like if you had
remember,
like normal grip, and then more grip, like maybe it just didn't, it was too much of adding another variable in a sense. But now that
well,
sealant's
even
gone, it's
remember,
consistent.
speaking of that sealant, remember before Petite, I know we met with some guys from Road Atlanta, and they were telling us, they put down this new, it's some kind of a sealant in 6 and 7, 10A, I think 1 as well, where like it basically was trying to add grip to these corners. Now that was October, so 6 months ago or more. I don't feel like it's there anymore because I remember like the October and November dates that we did at Road Atlanta were like you were moving through 6 and 7. You had a bunch more grip. And if you're not familiar with Road Atlanta Turn 6, it has a ton of camber in it. If you haven't walked it. And so now adding, this sticky sealant stuff, I mean, you were 3-4 mile an hour faster through those turns, even on like just a street tire. So yes, I think surface changes are probably maybe one of the more legitimate driver excuses. Should we talk about ice mode? Because ice mode
What about
is
ice
kind
mode?
of
Which ice mode are you referring to?
so ice mode. Yeah, this story was 5 years ago at another racetrack here in Atlanta, and one of the upper people were driving someone else's car, ended up unfortunately damaging this vehicle, and the excuse was, "Oh yeah, it went into ice mode." Oh yeah, carbon ceramic brakes have this ice mode where you stomp on them and just basically nothing happens. Really, what that is, my understanding of ice mode, is basically the ABS can't handle what you asked it to do, and it just slides. But I've heard this ice mode excuse a few times, and not so much for people messing up a lap, but like when they hit something, oh man, I just went into ice mode and I couldn't do anything, it wouldn't handle. To be honest, I think that's user error. You've heard that story that I'm referring to, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was unfortunate. But,
it was very unfortunate. No one got hurt. The car got hurt.
That's actually ice. Yeah, he was fine. I think that person went and hopped in another car and gave it another shot, which is like I love it. He's back on the horse, like
yeah.
Not gonna name names, obviously, but it's a good story at least. Yes, I mean, so ice mode or ice pedal is definitely known with a couple of manufacturers, and it's a legitimate thing. So the car, what will happen is that you basically you kind of overwhelm the car in a sense where you're flat out and you go big onto the brakes and you get into the ABS and the car, because what I've noticed, and this is just my observation, but like basically when you beat the brake pedal, if you beat your foot, you beat the weight transfer essentially. So if you go to the brake so hard before the weight transfers to the nose, and there's no lift and coast period, like it's full throttle straight to brake, and you beat the nose down with your foot, the car thinks it's on ice. Is what happens.
Yeah.
So what it does,
that's where the ice mode comes in. Yeah.
It takes control of the vehicle. The cars have gotten to a point where they think they're smarter than the driver, and which sometimes may be true, but in this instance, it's definitely not. And the car will basically, like, I've had the pedal be pulled away from my foot, where the pedal will pull itself down farther to try to basically take control of the car and keep you from, because if you hit the brakes on ice, nothing's going to happen. You're just going to go straight. So it puts you in ABS, and it tries to get you to, it releases some of the brake pressure and tries to get the car to roll. We're on a racetrack doing 160 miles an hour. That, like, I experienced it on Tuesday, a couple of days ago, earlier this week, and it's like one of the scariest things that you can experience, where it's like, I went to the brake, and then the pedal, like, I had to chase the pedal down, and like, and yeah, like, you think about it in hindsight, it's like, do I try to pull it back up with my foot or what? But it's common.
Yeah. So so how do you combat it?
Cars with single master cylinders is what it is. So basically anything that's a brake boosted or power assisted brake pedal is essentially at, yeah, it's prone. That's a better way of putting it. So when you see it, like, you see it in Porsches, you see it in Ferraris. I've experienced it in everything from a Club Sport or GT3. Well, I don't know if I've experienced it in a GT3. I would definitely experience it in a Club Sport, and I've experienced it in a Cayenne Turbo S. So a lot of the street cars do it, or at least like the single master Club Sport will do it, because it's the street car brake pedal essentially.
I know, like,
master.
In the BMW that I run, approaching heavy brake zones, we typically, instead of going straight to full, at least I kind of set the pad. It's kind of a tap and then into it. It's not a release, but it's a tap in and then to full. And it helps avoid ABS activation on at least just, a converted street car kind of thing. But, ice mode, I think, real thing. I think it does happen. But in the sense of that previous story, I think that was more not what happened. But it's what he blamed it on.
I wasn't in the car. I, like, without pulling data, to say it is or isn't true. If you've ever been on track and stomped on a brake pedal and the car just didn't slow down, then you've experienced that ice pedal or ice mode or whatever you want to call it. You've experienced some form of the car taking control and trying to direct what you're doing. And it's scary. So I think that one was legit. I think
it's legit. Still a fun story.
Instance that you're talking about, I think it's legitimate. Yeah. I think that's
okay.
I don't think he would have made that up. I don't think he's that clever.
Fair. Okay. Fair. But whatever. Okay. So the kind of the last one I want to get caught up on, and I want to talk about some of the people that we run with as well, because I think this comes into play if you're really starting to get deep into this hobby or starting to try to want to race. There's that you keep catching traffic. It is hard to put together a solid lap, I think, sometimes when there's too many cars on track, or if there is a difference in pace. I think this is one of the more legitimate excuses when you're trying to work on something. Like, hey man, I couldn't catch a break, in traffic. I kept catching that Miata going into whatever, or I kept catching that slow challenge car. I mean, whatever it is, someone was betting in brakes, and so I messed me up. So traffic, legitimate excuse?
It is. Traffic, well, it is and it isn't. The data at the end of the day doesn't lie. So, like, if you go out for qualifying and you hit traffic and you don't get a lap in, it doesn't matter what the excuse is. It's still on you and your team, and you got to recover from that. So, like, it's a legitimate obstacle to overcome, but I don't. That's really what I kind of see as most of these things is they're just obstacles to overcome. So, like, to go a step farther, right? Like, how do you as a driver, Adam, like, how would you go to avoid some of these things? And, like, what can you do to put the power, put yourself in power to not having these excuses?
So in terms of the traffic excuse, I think it's tough because, okay, so let's talk about a chin track day. Right, you're out there. If you're in the upper groups, or if you're in a solo group, you're probably out there with anywhere from 25 to 40 cars, depending on track length. And some tracks, you know, you can have 40 people out there and never see anybody. Some tracks, if you have 40 people, you're nose to tail with someone the whole time. I remember very early on when I was starting to start this, 10 years ago, someone said, hey, listen, you can always come in the pits and ask for a gap. The the starter will try his best to give you a gap that's big enough for you to get on track, up to speed, and then back on your pace. So then you have people, in front of you, but way ahead, and behind you, way behind. But then you're staying with the flow of traffic. So that one I think is pretty easy to adjust. You just got to have the mindset of don't get the red mist. If you keep hitting traffic, come in, run through the pits, at your 20 mile an hour, your people are going to pass you. So the fast car behind you is going to get passed. And hopefully that slower car gets far enough down track where you're not going to see him for another 2 or 3 laps. So that one I think is pretty easy to pace out. And I imagine like from a race perspective, like during qualifying, your strategist and your, not your overseers. What am I calling them? Your, can't forget your spotters. No, your spotters are helping you say like, hey, car behind is faster. Let them by. And then you got room. Or, hey, car in front of you is getting slow. Take a breather on this lap as you're warming up. And then, I'll give you the go ahead when you can start getting back on pace. So I think I'm assuming that happens in some of these, especially the bigger races where you have a spotter and a strategist.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah. Like, if you're dropping down in Road Atlanta, if you're going in at 10 and there's nobody behind you, and you're trying to set up a lap, then like it's, you hang back until like you see the next car come. I did this at the Trans Am for qualifying, and like at the race here at Atlanta, and like went into 10A. I came out of 7, didn't see anyone. Went through 8, didn't see anybody. So I started lifting on the back straightaway, and you can 100% set up a lap. Like we wouldn't have gotten the qualifying lap we got if we weren't if we weren't strategic and methodical about this. So like you hang out, you set up a lap, you put a big gap, like you said. And then you can maybe get 1 or 2, maybe 3 laps, which is ideal. But you got to set it up. Like, if you're going to hit traffic, then it's okay to like throw away 1 lap at the opportunity to capitalize on the next. And I know what I often see is like, you get out there and you want to just turn laps, work through the traffic, but you never actually find your gap. You got to make the gap.
Correct.
So I think that's one of the things we can do to avoid that excuse. But it takes a lot of kind of presence and some experience and setting it up and having your spotters telling you that there's no cars 40. There's nothing within 40 cars of you behind you, and having help on pit lane and help on from your team it goes a long way for sure. There's good value in a spotter.
I think in the track day sense, it's you see some people when you're at track day, and this is my perspective, the guys who you can tell they're eager to get out to try to get ahead of traffic. They're on grid 8 minutes early. They're sitting there and they wait. So they want to be the first out. But then you have other people who have the other mindset is like, I want to be in the back. It's always kind of a funny thing. People's strategies to find that gap. I think there's merits to both, first out, but then you're going to end up catching someone slow on the back end or someone who came out late. That there's kind of
you
way to do both.
That's why there's no reason to charge on your outlap, in my opinion, where it's like you can take a little bit more time, you'll get someone that'll try to blitz the field, but like you can, if you really like set it up and you go as slow as you can on that outlap, then it'll limit your risk of running into the back of the field. And there's another time, so like I'm giving away some secrets here, but like right after lunch, everybody's slow getting back on track. Yep. And like if you're trying to get a lap in, it's kind of your last. It could be your last shot before track starts getting greasy and tires start falling off.
Excuses.
It's your kind of your last shot. Exactly, like some valid there, some validity in those. But like you kind of have one more shot right after lunch to go, and because like everyone's pretty slow and lethargic after lunch, and they're you kind of get distracted for an hour, and most people they aren't sitting. You only have 1 or 2 cars waiting at pit out. At the end of lunch, whereas like that's been something that I've been able to capitalize on a lot with our program with the Kingpin team. So
yeah, and I think that's also, a lot of this also, if you're trying to take your hobby to the next level, it does matter who you run with. And this, I don't want to be controversial with this, but depending on who you run with and how they operate the day, can give you more advantage to getting cleaner, faster laps. For instance, our good friends at Chin, they run their red group, which should be their fastest group, first thing in the morning. And then they're kind of the first group out. So they get a little penalized because it could be a green track, but then they help rubber in. And then as the day goes on, you typically have kind of more, I don't want to say preferred times of the day, but it is sort of a preferred time of the day. So I really applaud Chin for making sure that kind of works the right way. They also have a lot of pro teams come out and test. So they've set themselves up for that. The next step, that's such a run group, kind of a DE organization. Then you have like David Murray, who we were just with David Murray the last 2 days. That's open track. And typically it's professional race teams and then high level, HPE guys, that are probably getting ready for a club race or a WRL or something like that. That's typically what you see out there. But what's nice is it's open track. So you're not limited by timing. You can run an hour, you can run 5 minutes, you can come in and out as much as you want. And then kind of the in between, in my mind, is like the driving club. Still run groups, but you do get more track time with less people. And that's where I think they meet in the middle, where it's less people, so you're not hitting as much traffic. David Murray, you could be out there and everyone's out, or you could just be you. Yeah. Chin, typically 80% of your run group is running while you're running. So, you hit some traffic, but they also try to keep pace the same. You'll get the occasional Miata. You're out there with challenge cars, cup cars, high level street cars, things that are running high 20s, anywhere from 20 to low 30s. And then you'll get a random Miata. But that's fine, because typically that Miata guy's getting out of the way, or he's faster than you in the corners. So it balances out. So you do have to take into consideration what you're trying. If you're just trying to lap your street car and just have a good time, there's plenty of great organizations. Jay Zilla's great. And then your local car clubs, so PCA, BMW CCA, those are great to just kind of run your car as you brought it and maybe not be in a super competitive or high level HPDE style environment. But there's excuses for everyone and for every situation. The takeaway I'm getting from the conversation we just had is, yes, there are excuses, but they can be legitimate. Even if we make fun of you for it or give you a hard time.
Set your goals.
So is there anything else you set goals accordingly? That's one thing.
If you're going to like the guys that we were with earlier this week, we've done, a bunch of driving club days, done a bunch of Chin days. And, eventually they got to the point where it's like, all right, kind of like you can see it on the theoretical on the data. It's like, this is, I'm flirting with this, sub 90-second time at Road Atlanta. It's like, how do we get there?
Yeah.
It's like, let's go do a David Murray day where it's going to be open track.
Yep.
And we can have a little bit more, or you get more freedom and more opportunity to get some clean laps. And it worked well. Both of those guys got down to the 28s and they're hauling the mail in their golf sports. Yeah, I'm super thrilled for them. Yeah. It's really, really cool. But,
they've seen great improvement.
Goals and, plan accordingly. Like you can, if having a green track is that one's harder to control, but as far as tires, car, traffic, and everything else, like there are things that we can do, as drivers to put the power in our hands to overcome those things. We don't have to. You shouldn't be a passenger, especially when you're at the wheel. So
this is true, and
relinquish the power.
That's right. And I think we've said this on probably every podcast, but one thing that we both do for each other, and I think in our heads, if we're not there, it's you get in the car is what's the goal? What's the goal for each session? I think as long as you're trying to achieve something, be it qualifying time, a personal best during a track day, hitting turn 1 correctly, whatever it is, the driver excuses can be legitimate, but we can, like I said, but we will still probably make fun of you for it. But they are legit.
And if your goal is to go out there and pass as many cars as you can pass, then that's fine too. Go out there and have some fun on some old tires. That's 100%. But you don't go out there with the mindset that you're gonna, you might beat your best ever time.
Correct.
Because one, managing expectations is important. Not only with others but with yourself. And it's you got to have a goal. It's something that keeps us purposeful in what we're doing, but it also keeps us safe and keeps us targeted and focused.
It separates us from the animals. Well, with that, I think we're going to end today's episode. Like I said, we'll try to keep on the schedule of every 2 weeks or so. Let us know in the comments if you have any driver excuses that we didn't cover, or that your favorite one you've heard. And maybe we'll do a follow-up segment on the next one of the best ones that we saw. Until then, I'm Adam. That's Tyler. This is PitBox Social, and we'll see you next time. Be safe on track.
Peace.